Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to talk about scaling up a company and the impact that has on operations and stability. So let's get into it. Now, let's have a bit of context, because we love context, don't we? Context gives meaning to things. So the other day we were walking through a couple of issues that our project manager had raised, let's call it just that. And the core fundamental part, we talked about a lot of different things, of course, but this is the one that we kind of stuck with. And the question was basically that since the company has grown quite exponentially in a very short amount of time, we have been experiencing a few stability issues here and there basically. Or rather, from my PO, my project managers or project officer or something like that, my project manager's perspective, we've had a few outages and a little bit of downtime that has affected the perceived quality of the application. Not in our user's perspective. The usage of the application is at an all-time high as far as I know. But from her perspective, that was a question that was raised basically. Why have we had so many issues with downtimes and critical failures and stuff of that nature? And this is a great question. And this is one of those things where only somebody who has experience and technical skills will be able to give a good answer to this one without you have to kind of keep yourself rein in all the emotions that you have and just try to just take everything down to a good level and in a very calm fashion explain that, well, you see, this is exactly what happens when you ignore good practices. And so I've, with a silky smooth voice, tried to explain to my project manager that these are not unexpected events for us in the development department and us who are working with the operations. And she kind of just looked at me and said, well, okay, so you mean that this is expected? And I said, yeah, this is expected. You see, when a small company starts growing and you get what we call exponential growth, which is very common in startups that actually make some type of headway in the company, if you will, or gains quite a lot of popularity in a very short amount of time. What happens is that you have the thing that every single company, even the really large companies, fear. You have a scaling issue. What do I mean by a scaling issue? Well, a scaling issue can be many things. Some people will say that, well, you have an interface or an application that doesn't really scale up to the more advanced needs of your customers. That's absolutely one type of scaling issue. But the more fundamental part of a scaling issue is that you simply have written code and structured your application in such a way that maintaining the amount of users you have was fairly easy at small scale. In other words, you didn't have all that many users, but when that slope gets really, really sharp and you peak with or get a really big influx of new users, your system can't keep up. And there's many ways to solve this problem. And for the most part, you will, as a developer, face this problem, which I have faced so many times that I could almost write a book, I think. Because what happens is that you warn because as a good developer or as a person who understands these things, hopefully you have had the foresight to understand that it's very important to have health checks to make sure that you're measuring how much CPU and memory you're using, the stability, you log errors, you make sure, because it's critical for you. And this is something that business people can understand to a point, but they don't understand how much goes into this actually, and what the core issue with having these sort of safety guards in place actually, well, they don't understand how it works. And I'm going to try to explain it to you as I explained it to my product manager. So what happens is that when you start measuring all of these things and you get a good feel for the health of your system, that's just step one. But for business people, they seem to believe that that's all there is to it. But see, just putting in all that work and measuring and getting metrics and so forth, that's just you plugging your system into one of those machines that checks the pulse. That's it. You're now just monitoring how well things are going. That does not mean that your system can't have a heart attack at any given moment. That's why you have to have skilled people that actually understand what different business decisions how different business decisions and coding practices and features are going to affect the system as a whole. And that's what I was trying to explain to my PO. I was saying that at a small scale, the right decisions for your company is, in fact, to actually just get things quickly shipped as fast as humanly possible. And you kind of have to cut some corners in order to be able to get something up and running in the shortest amount of time. But when you get a little bit of traction and say your company starts growing, you will actually have to pay back that. You always pay back. You don't think so, but you always. Guys, I'm saying it right now. Legacy code and tech debt and hacking things together, it always comes back to you. Always. No exceptions. It may not come back in the form of a really high cost to your company, but it always comes back. That's something you should always be aware of when you're doing these sorts of things. So what I explained to my PO was that when a company goes from very small to fairly large, the scaling issue will happen because now you have a completely different environment and you're facing the sort of challenges at a small scale still, but the same sort of challenges the really large companies who have massive amounts of users face. Because now you're in that magical moment that I keep on telling you juniors, that where you actually need to start thinking about containers, clusters, health checks, best practices, optimization, these sorts of things. This is when it starts mattering. It doesn't matter at all when you just have a small amount of users, but when you get to that magical threshold of a lot of users, this starts to get more important than most things. Because an application doesn't matter how amazing it is if it's down or flaky all the time. And the paradox and the frustrating part of all of this is that it doesn't matter how much you as a software engineer or an operations person warn your business people, because the mindset about these things is very much the same thing as with insurance. Nobody wants to pay for it, but they're very glad that they have when something goes wrong. It's the same type of deal, and this is why I was trying to just keep calm, because I mean, it's not like she wasn't aware of these issues, or that we have told her so many times that we need more stories and more time allocated to take care of the system, because the fact of the matter is that we need to maintain these sort of things, and this is something that business people do not want to hear, because maintaining and improving and doing this sort of thing is perceived as not being money producing or value building by a lot of people. If you have really good business people, they understand the value in this, and they definitely understand it when things, as I said, starts to actually break and it's costing the company money. That's when they start really caring. And so I explained that, you see, this is an ongoing process. It's not, because she was saying, okay, so how much time do you need to fix all these things? And I said, it doesn't work that way. Oh, it doesn't work that way. You don't get it. It's a continuous health maintenance. It's not something, oh, you fix it and then it's fixed. The health and the maintenance and stability of your application is tied into a continuous ongoing process. That's why you have operations people, because the fact of the matter is that every time you change something about the system or add new features, you are changing something about the system, which means that in theory these changes can either increase stability, decrease stability, or just maintain it. As soon as you add change, this is the thing that is unique about software. When you ship a car, that car stays the same as a product. Most products work that way, and most business people don't seem to understand that when you ship a physical product, it always stays the same. Software does not work that way. You change it continuously over and over and over for everybody who is using it for the most part. That means that you have to have a different mindset about these things. Because every time you change something, you introduce change. And change can be good and it can be bad. Kind of depends. So, I explained that this is an ongoing process. You will have to start realizing, and this is something, once again, small businesses don't really seem to understand. When you start out, you don't have these types of problems, which means that you can allocate 100% of your developer time to developing new features. But now, you start getting issues with uptime. That means that you now have a scaling issue, which means that you have to take away some time from the development and innovation and put it into maintenance, because otherwise the system will start breaking over and over and over. It's that simple. And the ungrateful part of it, and this I actually said to it, the ungrateful part about this, and I point to my colleague who is basically responsible for operations, is that a person like my colleague here can sit here and say to you over and over how important this is. And the only way you can know if what he's saying is correct is that nothing happens. Because if an operations person does absolutely everything correctly, you never know that that nothing happens. Everything just stays quiet. The only time you know if somebody's doing a really good job is that nothing happens. You know that something's not right when something breaks. And that's a really ungrateful position to be in, because you're basically just trusting that the person in operations is doing a really good job, because you have no idea of knowing, basically. Unless, as I said, the only time you get to really shine as an operations person is when something really bad happens and you fix it in a very short amount of time. And then you kind of, depending on company, you might get blamed that something went down, or people will be very appreciative that you actually fixed it in such a short amount of time. So I'll tell you guys what I told her. Operations and maintaining and scaling up a company is about more than just building nice features. When you reach a certain magical threshold, you have to start taking some time out of your development and put it into operations, and make sure that you have a good, solid foundation and good people who understand how to maintain a large product. It's not important at a small company, but it gets very important when you start scaling up. Have a great day.